everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Book of Law podcast. Today, Patrick and I are together at CheckAlt's headquarters in Valley Cottage, New York. It also happens to be my birthday, hence the decorations that my team generously created for us. Thank you.
She looks amazing for 30, everybody.
29. I'll take it. My team also made me this really cute mug that says Chaos Controller, which I think is awesome.
I love the word chaos. So, chaos controller. And that you are.
Should we have an episode on chaos?
I think everyone should work hard on being a master of chaos.
Yeah.
And you are a star.
Well, master of chaos controller, not of chaos creation.
Fine. No, not creation. Management of.
Management of. Well, we've got a great episode for you today. What we're here to talk about is EQ and IQ, why it matters to have a little bit of both. How do you figure out which one you tend to gravitate towards, and then how to get to ideally the middle. I'm going to start out with a little bit of the science behind emotional intelligence and emotional quotient, and then we're going to tell you some real life stories about the good, the bad, and the ugly. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, so this is the text that I actually found deep in the depths of my bookshelves. Emotional intelligence, this was popularized by Daniel Goleman in the late 90s. I think it was 1997. And there were two psychologists that actually did the original research, and then Dan Goleman popularized it. And it's become kind of a buzzword in corporate America, right? What's your emotional intelligence? What's your EQ? What's your IQ? And it's interesting that it has been proven that emotional intelligence is one of the biggest predictors of success. So that they know. But what we don't know is, how do you actually measure EQ, right? So you can do a psychometrically valid test on your IQ, right? Not the ones on BuzzFeed, but like the ones that are like facilitated by experts, and they will tell you what your IQ is. And there's different ones for different ages and developmental stages. But to my knowledge, and according to the research that I saw, nobody has really figured out how to score yourself on emotional intelligence. So we really don't have a way to measure it. It's still kind of subjective. But we do know that it's important, and we also know what it is. So let's start out by talking about what emotional intelligence is. So there's really three parts to it. The first is being aware of your emotions and the emotions of the people around you. We talked about that a lot last week, right? We covered that. And you're going to see a thread that flows through. Today is really the culmination of this unit. And then we'll tell you later, we'll kickstart to a different topic next time. We covered that part of being aware of your emotions, of your emotional impact on others. The second part of emotional intelligence is actually how you can harness your emotional intelligence to get ahead at work. So how you can utilize your emotions, your skill sets on your teams, with your colleagues in the workplace. And then the third part is actually how we regulate our emotions. So emotional regulation is a really interesting term. Some people think that it means, well, you need to suppress your emotions. So if you feel a certain way, you have to sort of tamp them down and not let anyone know how you feel. And that's actually not what it is at all, because that doesn't work, right? If you kind of squelch your feelings to the bottom, at some point, most people explode, and then it's a lot worse than if you kind of let them out like a pressure cooker along the way. And so regulating emotions is probably another topic for another time. But essentially, once you have emotions and you're not sure if they're appropriate, noticing them and naming them is the first step, right? I am feeling angry. I'm feeling really frustrated. I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling attacked. I'm feeling bullied, whatever it is, a good emotion or a bad emotion. And so essentially, there are three ways to regulate it. The first thing is you can control the situation, right? You can say, I'm not going to come to that meeting because I know that I'm going to blow up at this other person. So you're actually, right, controlling the situation. Another thing is where you actually change the way you are interpreting your emotions, right? So you might be really upset at someone, and if I go to that meeting, I'm going to blow up at that person. So another tactic to regulate your emotions is actually to reappraise the situation. So to say, I wonder if he was really doing this to upset me, or maybe there's another explanation, right? And then what you do is you open yourself up for a different type of reaction. And then the third part is actually changing the way you react. So you're going to be angry. You have to go to the situation where you're going to be confronted with somebody who's going to make yourself angry. And so what can you do to make sure that you don't express your emotions in a way that will be hurtful to other people or damaging to yourself? And so there's lots of different ways. Some people do mindfulness. Some people have different other therapeutic techniques. But that's the emotional regulation part. And, if you think about it, if you think about how you regulate your emotions at work, or how you use your emotions and your emotion expression to its advantage at work, it's interesting, right? You may be doing it a lot more than you notice. After listening to us today, you might start recognizing things that happen in your own workplace. You might say, ooh, that's what that person is doing. Or I can coach and I can counsel my team member to adjust their approach or do things a little bit differently. So that is the definition of what it is. It's interesting. I'm actually, I think you all know, I'm finishing my graduate degree and I'm writing my last paper. And it's about the gender dynamics of how we express our emotions at work. That's what it's about. And so I combed through a ton of science and a ton of research papers. And what's really interesting is a lot of the researchers agree that men and women have the same emotions as each other, right? We have the same emotions. The difference is how we feel comfortable or allowed to express them. So the official term for this is display rules. What are the display rules for your emotions?
And they're different for men and women.
They're different for men and women. So for example,
you're saying this, the research show this, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Have you seen that in your experience, in your lived experience?
Yeah, every day.
Yeah, right. So the two emotions that the research that I've seen focuses on is anger and happiness. So men are much more likely to express their anger at work than women, even though women also get angry, right? Women are not like all serene beings. And by the way, when I say men and women, it's many men and many women. Obviously, there are outliers. We're not completely generalizing or stereotyping. And then women tend to feel more comfortable displaying their happiness at work. So it's interesting. There's a lot to unpack here, and
keep pulling on that.
Yeah,
share more on
that. Okay.
Because I think it's interesting, and it doesn't get talked about enough. Now, I've had many a dialogue with female coworkers, leaders, associates, my wife, our daughter, my sister. Like, I love getting their insight on what work is like for them.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with representation in the room, right? So if you are an only, and my friend Olivia, who I think should be a guest on our podcast once,
yeah, for sure,
she loves to talk about onlyness. Like, what is the dimension of experience when you are the only one in the room? You're the only woman in the room, you're the only person of color in the room.
She coined the word onlyness.
I think she may have coined it, but she talks about it a lot, and she has incredible insights. Yeah. So Olivia, if you're listening, we would love for you to come on our podcast and talk about this.
Yes,
but
Olivia.
the onlyness can be anything. It could be the only person who, I don't know, has a particular hobby, or the only person that has a physical or cognitive disability, or the only person that maybe English is not their first language. So the onlyness can come from a variety of ways. But when someone is an only, right? So say you and I are in a room, and maybe there's like 3 women and 25 men, and we both get really, really angry. Let's say something happens and both of us get really angry. So what research has proved, and this is fascinating, that if you ask other people to judge the difference between our anger, what they're most likely to say is, I'm angry because I'm an angry person. I'm an angry emotional person. There's an intrinsic reason for my anger. What they'll be more likely to say about you is, oh, he probably had a really bad day. Or it wasn't his fault. Other people were, did something and that's what caused your anger. And it's not because they think men are better than women, or that men can control their anger more than women. The reason is that because there's fewer women, or most of the women they know don't typically express their anger, they automatically assume that I'm an outlier. And I get angry because I'm an angry person, whereas the other women they know don't get angry.
They don't express their anger because they've been taught through their life not to, that it's inappropriate for a female to have an outburst. So or because of some other reason.
So in the evidence that I've seen, I don't think there's a physiological answer to it. I think it's years of socialization and the culture and the unwritten rules, right, that we find ourselves in.
Okay.
Yeah. I think also that
there's a version of unfairness in that that's pretty intense.
There is. And, there's another piece of research that shows that women are unfairly penalized for expressing their emotions more than men, right? But because biology is not what makes the difference and it's all culture, I know this sounds easier said than done, but soon when our workforce is more inclusive and more equitable, then this may not be a problem anymore, right? So for example, if you have more balanced groups and there is less onlyness, or there isn't a single majority group, so everyone sort of feels like we contribute whatever it is we contribute, then what happens next is if somebody expresses anger, they're not automatically attributing it to some intrinsic reason.
Were you able to weave EI into your paper?
So I did. The focus was not necessarily on the expression of EI. The focus is what kind of research could be done to further this concept. Okay. So that was interesting. Another, some other examples were that people, men and women, our standards are falling out, are more likely to actually show more kindness to women in their performance reviews.
Really?
Because women typically will express more warmth than men, typically, not always, obviously. And so what that means is, as a reviewer, you may be less likely to give your female employees more candid feedback, which actually holds them back if they're not getting the input and the development guidance that they need. So this is really, really interesting. What's really interesting is that in some situations, obviously, you may not be able to win. There's some cultures, back to what we talked about the other week, where the unwritten rule is that you don't express your emotion at work. Like if you're having a bad day, nobody needs to know about it. And then there are other places.
I never learned that lesson.
Did you never learn that lesson?
I don't think I ever learned that lesson.
Tell us more.
No, you can finish it and I'll jump into some of the practical.
Okay, you'll hear more about it after. But what that means is maybe people feel like they have to regulate them to match other people. Maybe if they see all of the executives being like super stoic, right, and not sharing when they had a bad day, or not admitting to a mistake, or not showing vulnerability, right, which is another concept that we've talked about. Then what happens is everyone says, oh, well, those are the rules. Right? And then those become the emotion display rules of your organization, where if somebody's having a really bad day because something terrible is going on in their life, but they don't feel comfortable expressing their emotion about it, and then they mess up a work project, and then somebody's like, hey, why you're being sloppy or you're not paying enough attention. If you as the manager knew that they've just experienced a terrible loss, or maybe they got a tragic diagnosis or something like that, wouldn't you be more understanding? Wouldn't you want to know if something like this is going on?
I'd want to be, yes.
Yeah. And again, not that if somebody does something horrible, it doesn't explain it. Like if you, I don't know, do something unethical by mistake, or you jeopardize a company's revenue, like the mistake is still there, right? This is not about saying, oh, we need to be all warm and fuzzy and sparkles and rainbows all day. That's not what emotional intelligence is. And in fact, I've worked with leaders who I think were trying too hard to be emotionally intelligent. And it was sort of like, well, let's start every meeting and let's tell us how we feel. Or I don't know, what's an object that sparks joy for you? I don't know, things like that, right? And of course, there's always people who roll their eyes, right? Because that stuff doesn't always resonate. And so emotional intelligence is not performative, right? It doesn't need to be, let's just talk about our emotions. It's actually how we allow our emotions to do the work for us in our environment.
Yeah.
So I think, again, we can go on and on about this topic, but what I really want us to get to next is what's the good, bad, and the ugly. So Patrick, have you seen, I'm sure you have seen leaders in your world, in your experience, who either completely were missing the emotional intelligence app. They just didn't have it, and their IQ didn't get them as far as they had expected. Or the opposite, where a leader had incredible emotional intelligence and genuine emotional intelligence and was able to generate results that maybe they couldn't have gotten otherwise.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear that.
I'm still, it's different being in the room with you.
I know.
Like, do I look at you here?
Yeah.
Or do I actually look at the real version of you?
We're going to look at our
so
audience.
Much
We're going to look at our audience.
of our time together is looking at each other on a screen.
Yeah, it's true.
Which probably could be an episode of how do you transmit emotion or feeling when you're a flat Stanley.
Do you know why it's so exhausting?
Versus me and you sitting here. Please.
Do you know why being on endless Zooms is more emotionally exhausting than being in a meeting?
Is it something to do with seeing yourself on camera?
So some people say that. And actually some people get really distracted by seeing themselves, where they're always kind of looking and picking apart their appearance. And so Zoom and Teams and all the others have a feature where you can turn off your self-view. But it's actually different. When we're sitting around the table, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say, remember yesterday, there were like, 12 of us in a room for a meeting. And usually only one person was speaking at a single time. And then everyone looked at that person, right? And so as somebody else spoke, we all shifted our attention.
That's right.
And it was felt very natural, right? Yeah. We look around the room. When we're in a Zoom and you've got a bunch of little squares on the screen, everyone's looking at everyone, which is really stressful.
It puts your brain on overload.
It does, because you're taking in everyone's reactions and you're trying to pay attention to everyone's body language. It's a lot. So that's why it can get really exhausting. I don't know if we're evolutionarily adapting to that.
Probably.
Right.
So the question of what does it look like practically, the good, the bad, the ugly of people who were emotionally intelligent or who weren't. And then that makes me feel a little judgy because there was so much of my career where I didn't know what that meant. Like I've mentioned it the last couple of episodes, like my first 9 years in corporate America was devoid of anything culture. In terms of making culture a priority or making it a positive experience versus just climb the hill, climb the hill, climb the hill.
Yeah.
Like you should have a little bit of both, right? But on the EI journey, it was early on in the US bank days. So call it like 06, 07, 08, right before the housing crisis. I was selected to go to the University of Minnesota Carlson School of Management. US Bank Corp had a leadership development program in that school.
Oh.
Now it was after the housing crisis and budgets, what happens after these things, budgets go away. Then I ended up running the leadership program at the bank, which was odd because I wasn't in HR. I wasn't in
Sometimes
HR.
That's better.
Well,
right?
That's what their thought process was. Look, you got a big team inside the bank. You enjoy leadership. You take a swing at it. And I ended up running it for 8 years. And I made emotional intelligence a big part of it because what I learned at the University of Minnesota during the last year of their formal leadership program inside the bank, and I was the first non-banker to go through that and out of footprint, meaning like there were 28 or 30 states that US Bank had branches. I was in Texas where US Bank did not have a presence. They normally reserve that program for in-footprint employees. So I was flown into Minnesota from Texas to attend this thing. It was amazing. And the CEO kicked the program off, and he gave this amazing speech about emotional intelligence. And he said, you're either EQ or IQ. Find out which one you are most of and work your way the other direction, or at least be aware of it. Now, you can't.
Is that so you should end up in the middle? I'm sure most people are not completely.
I think he meant to be aware. I don't know if you can change your IQ. Like, you know much better than me, right? I mean, I don't think you can do anything to change your IQ score because the way that thing's built, it just kind of is what it is. Where EQ, you can actually work on that. And really, I think his point was, look, this bank is filled with a bunch of really smart people, but we lack the human connectivity to be a truly embiotic, swaying together organization.
Yeah.
And that takes EI. And his hope for that program, and I remember it very clearly because I was sitting in the front row and he was tapping his finger as he was speaking on the table I was sitting at. It was probably like a rhythm thing or what he does when he talks in public. I don't know. But I remember him tapping the table gently. And because I was so close to him.
I think tapping is a therapeutic technique.
I think that's what he was doing.
It deals with, I don't know exactly which pathologies it deals with.
I do it. Like when I publicly speak, I'm always touching something. Like I try not to make it a distraction or I'm moving.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it really landed on me. And it was, I want to say it was 6 months, 7 months, whatever the program length was. We spent a lot of time on getting to know who we are as people. Now, if you guys heard what I said last week about Farr and Associates, which is now called Truist Academy, because Truist Bank was BB&T, and BB&T bought Farr, and that whole leadership program at High Point moved to Truist. But in that program in 1999, so think about that, like almost 10 years before I ended up at the University of Minnesota for this bank thing, they were really big into what are you bringing with you? Like, what is your first emotion that walks in the room before you? Because there is a perception of you. Like, are you an angry person? Are you a passionate person? Are you a smiling person? Are you a happy person? I'm mixing facial expressions with emotion. But also
there's like a gossip mill. So
there's a gossip
people's
mill.
reputations precede them, right? So it may be that people aren't even giving you a fair shot. So, I heard this about that guy.
All of her birthday stuff is falling down around me. So sorry, everybody. So at Farr, they taught you to be aware of yourself, aware of self, right? And what the self brings into group environments. Now, think about back then, before the whole COVID thing with work from home and we're all flat Stanleys on screens, body language really mattered.
Yeah.
And I remember being called out on, like, I shake my leg a lot. Or like Richard, who was tapping the desk. Like, we all do something. And we got into the dialogue around, well, it looks like you're impatient, like you don't want to be there, that you're not interested in what other people are saying. And people were telling me that in real time. Patrick, are you listening?
But you know what? Can I stop you there? Because what if you would show up to a meeting with people who didn't know you well? And you would say, hey, by the way, everyone, you're going to see me tapping my feet. It's just a way that I release energy. It doesn't mean that
I do that now.
Because if you name it, you notice it and you
right.
name it, then people don't make up stories in their heads about what it is. Did I ever tell you the story of the candidate with the interview? So I think when we interact with people and we see something that seems off, right? We might see a habit that we attribute to something that is negative or just something that confuses us. It distracts our brain from focusing on the main topic. So I remember reading about an experiment, this was years ago, where they had a candidate pretend to go into an interview. And what they did was they took like a fake, and they like planted a fake birthmark on this guy's forehead. And it was like really prominent. Like when you looked at this person, all you saw was the birthmark. What they were trying to assess is, did this physical difference affect people's ability to pay attention to him and appreciate who he is?
Of course it did.
Of course it did. So here's what they did. So, and of course, with every experiment, you have the control group and you have the, experimental group. So the first time they had the guy come in with a fake birthmark on his forehead and just go through the interview. And what they monitored was the attention span and the eye contact of the interviewer. They monitored like how long did the interviewer spend? Were they checking their phone? Like what kind of questions were they asked? And then they had the guy go in again with the same birthmark and instead say, hey, I know you're probably noticing that I have this big birthmark. I was born with it. It's not dangerous. It doesn't hurt. Like, I just want to clear the air.
And then people stopped looking at it.
And then what happened was that interview went significantly better.
That's right.
Because the interviewer wasn't like, imagine, like, what is this? Is this guy in pain? Like, what does it mean? And they also saw that he was just really comfortable with himself and talking about himself. Right. So I always wonder, like, sometimes it's better to just
call
it out.
Say it. Yeah.
Call it out.
I do that now. Like I'll say, look, I just move a lot. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I don't care what you're saying. Yes. It means I have to get things
That's
out.
Emotionally intelligent.
Right. But I didn't know that until these programs these programs were amazing. And you also referenced last week, just because of the way budgets are, a lot of this stuff isn't available to people anymore. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do on your own that doesn't cost $1 gazillion to find out who and what you are and how you operate and what you look like to the outside world. Now, that is an experience and a journey that is not for everybody. Like if you really want to take a look at yourself, you want to unzip yourself, take a look at it and then put it back on. Like I've had a lot of sleepless nights receiving feedback about my behavior.
It's hard.
It's horribly hard. Yeah. And even when it comes from a trusted source, it's hard. Like you think that one would be a little easier, but it's actually worse because yes, like having hard conversations with others about their behavior and what that behavior does to others. Like I have accidentally stopped forward progress on programs or relationships or deals, depending on what genre you're talking about, based on my comments in the moment. Like my passion runneth over. And that comes across sometimes as opposite of what is really happening on the inside. Like another thing I say to people is like, look, I've got a little bit of RBF going on. If you guys don't know what RBF is, you can Google it. It'll tell you. I'm not going to say it on the podcast, but
you could say that.
Okay, resting bitch face. Yeah. So I have that, and I shouldn't be like a poker player. Like, and a lot of my EI results and things that I've done to find out who I am. One of the lines that comes back all the time is, I don't suffer fools well. And that comes across on my face. It comes across on my behavior. I write people off too early. Like people love to say, and I've said it about myself, I either love you or hate you in the first 5 seconds. Now think about how much of life I've missed because I'm quick to judge. I'm too quick to judge. And then when you start peeling back those layers of why am I too quick to judge? And there's not a couch in her office, so she can't give me therapy. Like, well, we're going to do the podcast.
We're going to do a session on unconscious bias, and also about Danny Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist who just passed away a couple weeks ago. Wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. So our brains have two systems of thinking. Yeah, right? You read that book.
So my pace and speed is off-putting for people. Yeah. What's in my heart doesn't always match my face. So that puts people in an odd position. So I'm constantly juggling all of these personal behaviors and glitches and stuff that I have about me. But it's been a 20 plus year journey of figuring out what I'm bringing to the moment And I consider that a version of emotional intelligence, that I'm engaged enough with what I am and who I am. I've had to learn to be happy with it. There's a lot about me I can't change, but I can maybe blunt or downshift. Because if you try to hide who and what you are, if you're not authentic, why would anyone follow someone who's fake? Yeah. And the people who know me the best, and you and I have gotten to know each other in a really short amount of time. Like we're coming up on really a year here real quick of working together. Like I'm sure there's moments you're like, what the hell is that? But
I'll ask you.
You do ask me.
Right.
Because you're emotionally intelligent. And because we're operating on a level of, we're on a journey of growing. Like we may be growing for different reasons. We may be in different parts of the hill that we're climbing on our growth.
But that brings us back to culture. It brings us back to culture and the rules, the display rules of our emotions.
I love being together because we can actually talk a little bit interactively. What is it that you say? I'm going to get it wrong, so bear with me, everybody. In an intellectually safe environment.
Oh, psychological safety.
Thank you.
Right? So imagine in the past, in all your early years, there were rules, display rules of emotions that were for sure unwritten.
This never got discussed.
Right.
I didn't even know how to
And so everyone assumes that they just have to show up like everyone else, like a bunch of robots or drones. And it's ironic, as we become more, as we introduce more robots into our lives, we allow more differentiation in humans.
Yes.
Right? So, and again, we are all constructed differently. Our brain chemistry, our personalities, right, are all different. And
you've watched me in person, through a screen or in person, get emotional about a topic.
Yeah.
Like if I'm talking about my son, who's a special needs kiddo, love him to death, but he touches our heart in a unique way, in a great way. I'm overly passionate at work, and so I've been told I sometimes take all this too seriously. Like I think our jobs should be taken seriously, and I think the people we serve. And this isn't a CheckAlt commercial or wherever I've worked before. I just believe that if someone's paying you for a service, you should rush providing that experience.
Of course.
And if that doesn't happen for everybody, I become I lose my bearing. I'm choosing my words wisely. Like, where I come from, military bearing is important. Like I can look across a room and can tell if somebody served or not, even if they haven't been in uniform for a very long time. And I usually don't get it wrong. Like I bet I get it right 9 times out of 10. There is a corporate bearing too. Like you said, there's unwritten rules and written rules about how you show up in work. Right. And I have been an unconventional, very casual leader my whole career. And because I got promoted super early, I was 28 when I became a VP, and I've only been in corporate America for 2 years. I had no training in this. I was just being my authentic self, even though I didn't know what my authentic self was.
Also, you don't come from a corporate family, right?
I do.
You do. So I don't. And I think people who are first generation corporate, right? Nobody's telling you about the faux pas, right? And what to say and what not to say and what to avoid.
No, my stepdad, my dad are both titans in their own areas. Like I grew up watching people build businesses, sell businesses, buy businesses. And it was fascinating, but I didn't, and I'm not dinging them. It just wasn't anything to discuss. Maybe it was the military. Maybe it was the flying I did after the military, because aviation is a bit of a military kind of club that you hang out in. I wouldn't call the airport hangar a real corporate environment.
Right.
It's a good time, and then you get real serious when you fire the bird up, and then you're going, and that's very serious, lifting metal off the ground.
Well, you have people's lives in your hands.
That's right. But when you come back, it's just you're yucking it up. So by the time I hit corporate America, Rachel, I was a loose cannon. And but I loved it, and I wouldn't change it.
Of course you loved it. It was probably really fun for you. For
me. But then I started to realize what that loose cannon was doing to other people. And even though we were getting a lot done, Rachel and audience, I left a lot of bodies behind me along the way, because I wasn't aware, and people can judge me for it, and that's okay, because in some cases I deserve it. Like I saw a poster years ago, and you see it online all the time now, like be kind to everybody because you never know what they're going through. Like I didn't have that in me. Like I never took into account what the person across the desk may have been dealing with that morning.
Yeah.
Now, when I got married and had a kid, and then especially having a special needs kiddo, and I'm a step parent, Like you deal with all of these really heavy things in your personal life, and then you bring them to work with you.
Yeah.
If you aren't emotionally grounded when you're dealing with life, and then you're at work, and not everybody takes work as seriously as I do or does, because they're like, well, look, it's just work. But to me, work is life.
Yeah.
And that comes across in a really fascinating way. So part of my journey, and I'll keep staring at the book she has on her desk, is who am I?
Yeah.
How am I coming in to lead others that may be experiencing life? They're not just here to do debit cards and credit cards and payments.
And what's going on in their world. So, the first question I ask, if in HR, right, typically, there was issues, right? Whether it's something happened or there's an issue with an employee or there's an attendance thing or a performance thing or a conflict, right? What do you think my first question is? So my first question is, did you ask them if they're okay? Like, is there anything?
You have asked that.
Is there anything going on that we should be aware of that we can help this person with? Because sometimes, again, because not everyone, including us, nobody's emotionally intelligent at 100%. What happens is we can't create really rigid borders between our work and our life. It just doesn't work like that.
It doesn't.
And so I think being emotionally intelligent to be able to understand how other people are regulating their emotions is really important.
Yeah, throttling intensity.
Yes.
For me, down, because I walk, talk, and chew gum with purpose.
So what do you do when you realize that your intensity level doesn't match either the intensity level of others in the room or the demands of the situation?
Today or yesterday? Today. I'm hyper aware of the effect I have on others. Like people can feel my mood. And it took me a long time to understand that. Like people were telling me that. They're like, Patrick, you gotta maybe go take a walk or, because we need you in this meeting fully present and neutral. And I didn't know what that meant. Because I came in every meeting like, like, let's go.
Yeah.
But not everyone's ready for let's go. So I spend a lot of personal energy and emotional energy walking in really, I'll use the word again, neutral.
Regulating.
I'm constantly regulating myself. Now, sometimes the thermostat breaks and I can't regulate it. And one thing that FAR did to me, I didn't mention it last week, I want to mention it now. They would deconstruct my sentences. They would record me and then make me listen to myself. Did I tell you this part?
Yes, but
that was the interviews I told you about.
Okay.
They were recording me in meetings. And then they would play it back. And because I was so running down the road like a crazed man, I forgot I was even being recorded. So when you forget you're being recorded and then you listen to yourself, you're like, oh my God. And then you deconstruct the sentences.
But you know what that's like? It's like, I'm going to mess up the sports analogy, but it's like watching game tape.
That's right.
Right? Where you're saying, what did I do? How did I act? And then you can see yourself from another perspective and then know how to do things differently next time if needed.
But what it did to me was like, now I don't need to do that anymore. I'm not deconstructing my sentences. But I'm really focused on my word choice. And that's exhausting too. Like working your emotional intelligence is tiring. Like I tell people all the time, if you're not exhausted at the end of the day leading people, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
But it took 10 years for me to learn that. And I'm 27 years in this October. The last 17 have been pretty good. The first 10 was like, oh my God.
That's a pretty good track record.
Pretty good. Like I've blown things up, Rachel. Like you've seen me. Like even here, I have had a moment. But it's done this.
But a moment is also, everyone has moments, right? But a moment is not a week.
It isn't a week.
Right.
But I do lose sleep over it. That's the summary of all this.
But that's the awareness. That's the awareness.
But I stay awake like, why did I say that word? Or why did I do it that way? Because I could see it on their faces.
Yeah.
You can be an efficient leader, even though it's exhausting, and save everybody emotional minutes. I call them emotional minutes. Like if I can save people emotional minutes in an already charged emotional environment, why double down? But it took years to figure that part out.
And what's easier than changing the emotion in the moment is telling people about it. So even saying, hey, you're noticing that I'm getting worked up. It's because of this. It's nothing that you did. Give me an hour to get over it. Right? And then all of a sudden people realize, oh, it's not directed at me.
Correct.
That's his thing that he's got to work through.
Yeah. And I broadcast my emotional intelligence. Like I tell people, look, I lack in some areas of my leadership toolkit, I lack emotional intelligence. So there's going to be moments where you're like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
I identify it now. Like I call it out. And it's
That's
like
awesome.
the thing on the guy's head that you were describing. My thing on my head is I struggle sometimes with emotional intelligence because my problem has been for a very long time, I can see the end of almost, and this isn't, I swear I'm not being arrogant. I promise I'm not.
It's called being strategic.
I can see it.
Yeah.
And from here to there frustrates the hell out of me because I know.
You know how the story's going to end, and you just want to clear the hurdles.
I know how to get to the end of the story. It's not just I can see the end. I know how to get there, and not everyone has that capability. Yeah. And when you're working in a team of teams, and everyone's having a different moment in life.
It's true.
Divorces, death of a parent, bad grades for your kids, a sick kid, whatever's happening in your life. And then we come to work for our paycheck, which is very important, everybody.
Yeah.
And where does it fit in? Oh, I didn't get that project in on time. Or, hey, I didn't get that TPS report in. If you know the movie reference, put it in the chat.
That was a great movie.
The TPS report is like, but so finding a way to get a team of teams to all march together, that's where this I don't suffer fools well comes in. And these people aren't foolish, they're just living their life. That's just a phrase that comes out of a report when they do a personality test. But me being aware of that, facial expressions, body language, concepts, empathy. Like I lack empathy in a lot of areas, and that's a whole other probably podcast too, but you can't fake having empathy, but I can be aware of myself in the moment to say, hey, be nice to that person. You don't know what they're going through. And you can still get here. And you may actually save time and kill your deadline by removing friction that's an emotional baggage of yourself in the room. Just by being aware of what this is. It doesn't matter if you have high EI or low EI or medium EI. I believe 3/4 of the battle is being aware of the EI, and then you can focus. Like
do you know
EI 2.0.
Yeah.
Have you done that?
I don't think so.
Bella, our producer, I'll actually send a picture of the book, and we'll put the link in the chat. I want to say it's like a $14 book. It's just like StrengthsFinders.
I'm sure there's an online version. Yeah, we'll get it.
I'm sure there's an online version, and you can take in a self-assessment for $14. And it spits out what it says your emotional intelligence is. I think it asks you 15 to 25 questions, whatever it is. And I've done that in my teams where I've bought EI 2.0 for my teams and just had Laura, my EA, send it out to everybody. And then I wanted to talk to people about their EI if they were willing. Now HR, the HR leaders I had in my past were like, God, you can't just do that. I'm like, I'm all about asking for forgiveness later.
Obviously, you shouldn't pressure anyone.
No, I never did.
Right.
But I liked the dialogue of where they were, and I would just share my results first. Like, here's my EI. I'm low here, I'm high there, I'm medium there. This is what it's going to look like in a meeting, maybe. And when you get people talking like that, even if maybe not everyone has interest in the stuff like you and I do, Rachel. I mean, we're doing this because we actually enjoy this part of the job.
Yeah.
But even the people who may not be natural at understanding who they are or talking about leadership or engaging in strengths and weaknesses, it's an interesting dialogue to have, and you don't have to have it all the time.
But it's a very strong message to send people that we value these dimensions of your identity and your experience. If you had to guess, are people generally happier during their teenage, middle years, or as they get older? When are people more happy?
I think older people are happy.
Older people are happy. Why?
Because they have experience.
Okay.
They have things to weigh against. They've seen the highs and the lows and the mediums and everything in between. And if they've made it out okay, whatever that means, they're probably grateful they made it out.
They are. Also, as we get older, we savor the time we have left, right? It's like that last day of vacation, you're trying to soak in all the sun, right?
That's why the 28-year-old leader is not the 50-year-old leader.
Yeah. And you need different leaders for different growth stages and for
what is our
different
next episode going to be about?
Oh, our next episode is going to be what we wish we knew when we were just starting our career.
But our today's self.
Our today's self.
Talking to that version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. Like as a 28-year-old, I don't think I would have been able, I wouldn't even be able to sit with you and dialogue on this.
Well, you wouldn't think it was important.
I wouldn't have thought it was important.
Right?
Now I think culture, leadership, EIEQ, all of the things that we've been talking about are grounded in who the people are inside the culture. Like picking teammates.
Always.
Like when you and I are looking for talent, it's one of the first things we discuss, isn't it? Will they fit in the system?
Or will they add to the system?
Will they add additive? Right. We don't want detractors of culture. We want additives to culture.
Yeah.
So I think people should like spend the $14 on EI 2.0. I think it's a Gallup tool, just like SF.
Oh, is it?
And we're not paid by Gallup. We just like the product, and it's $14.
Okay, I'm gonna check it out.
And you can figure out a little bit of emotional intelligence and where you need to work.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Next episode will unfortunately not be in person unless I don't know.
I'll be in San Diego.
Ooh, I would want to
for our next recording. Visiting,
you know what?
Visiting a very important partner of ours.
San Diego might be a reason to travel.
We're going from Where's Warlow to Where's Patrick. My travel has been pretty intense.
You can be Carmen San Diego. Remember her?
I could be.
Okay, so next time we're going to talk about what our current selves wish we would have known back when we were starting out in our careers. And it's a really timely topic for graduation season. Right now we start. I love watching commencement speeches because they're always so inspirational, right? And if any of you are figuring out what you want to do next, or as you launch your careers, or as children in your life, young adults in your life launch their careers, some of our learnings might be valuable. Maybe
be comfortable being uncomfortable, everybody. It's part of the leadership journey and the education of yourself.
Yes.
We appreciate you listening.
Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.